I want also the audience to understand the old protocol. And the protocol is that I start my speech, then you come, dear Joseph, I'll give you the decoration. Decoration is just over there. This is the Légion d'honneur. And then when you have it, I say the words, au nom du président de la République française, je vous fais Chevalier dans l'ordre de la Légion d'honneur. And after that, you give the speech. Voilà. Donc, if we can start, mesdames et messieurs, chers amis, cher Joseph Picard. My name is Mustapha Soykourt. I am the French Consul General of France in New England, and I am very proud to be with you today on this very special occasion, as we have gathered here to honor an American veteran who fought during World War II. Cher Joseph, je suis très honoré, et je dois dire un peu ému, d'être à vos côtés ici, à Laconia, avec vos amis et votre famille. Today, we pay tribute to a true American hero. It is through the celebration of his courage that both the French Republic and the people of France remember that the American soldiers who helped them recover their freedom. Today is also the celebration of the long-standing French-American friendship from Yorktown and Lafayette to the beaches of Normandy. Our two countries have always stood shoulder to shoulder to defend our shared values of freedom and democracy. You, Joseph, embody this special bond between our two countries, being yourself of French ancestry. Our celebration today takes on a particular symbolic significance in the current context of the violence occurring in the world. At a time when our common values are being attacked, I do believe that it is very important that we further strengthen the bond uniting France and the United States. Et vous, cher Joseph, par la force et le courage remarquable dont vous avez fait preuve à l'âge de 18 ans, 18 ans, vous nous rappelez que même dans les heures les plus sombres, il y a toujours de l'espoir. Cher camarade canonnier et dactylographe Joseph Picard, vous êtes, et je pèse chacun de mes mots, un véritable héros. Et vous le resterez à jamais. We, French, will never forget what you did to restore our freedom. And today we also remember the ultimate sacrifice of so many of you comrades who now rest on French soil. Ils resteront, vous resterez, à jamais dans nos cœurs. In recognition of your heroic actions and extraordinary accomplishments, the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, nominated you to the Legion of Honor with the rank of Chevalier. It is Napoleon Bonaparte, a long time ago, who created the Legion of Honor in 1802 to reward extraordinary accomplishments and outstanding services rendered to France. It is my country's highest distinction and one of the most coveted in the world. I will now bestow this distinguished award upon you. Mr. Picard took part in combat on the following theaters of operation: Utah Beach, Orléans, Varennes, Québec, Carton, Saint-Clair-sur-Vesle, Saint-Gilles, Sept-Frères, Saint-Poix, Saint-Germain-de-Talleyrand, Domfront, Coutrin, Senonches, Mantes, Coignières, Glageon. Joseph Picard joined the Company M of the US Army 328th Infantry Division as a gunner and typist. After being drafted at the age of 18, he completed his military training in North Carolina in 1944. In April 44, his battalion left the US for Bournemouth, England. After 3 months training, the battalion arrived in France where they took part in several battles over the following months. Following the fighting in France, Mr. Picard continued his service with this battalion in Belgium and Germany. In addition to his role as typist and gunner, Mr. Picard was able to interpret for his battalion thanks to his French language skills that he still had. He finally returned to the US in December 45 after more than 2 years of service. Joseph, je vais vous demander de bien venir vers moi juste ici pour que je vous décore. Si vous voulez bien m'apporter la décoration. Vous venez juste ici si vous voulez bien, Joseph. Joseph Picard, au nom du président de la République française, nous vous faisons, je ne veux pas vous Chevalier dans l'ordre de la Légion d'honneur. Tout petit. Bravo. Let me help you. That's okay?
Yeah.
Tout va bien?
Oui.
Très bien. Je me mets juste à côté de vous. Je vous écoute.
Ambassadeur Soker, Madame Soker, et l'équipe de l'ambassade de Boston. Merci beaucoup, Consul Général. It's my great honor to be here today and to receive this wonderful, unique award. I'm going to say a few words, and I hope you won't mind, but there may be some repetition from what the ambassador just said, because this was my career, not my career, but my stay in the service in World War II, where I served in France. Back in 1943, when I graduated from high school, I graduated on my birthday, my 18th birthday. And after graduation, I went down to the draft board to register. That was required by law at that time. But it didn't, excuse me, it didn't take long for the government to catch up with me. In August, I got a letter from the president, greetings and salutations, and report for a physical exam in 2 weeks. So come August of 43, I was already in the service. We were heading for Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Now, to give you an idea of how quickly things were moving at that time, we got a phone call that we were being redirected to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, instead of Fort Jackson. That's how quickly we were going. Fort Bragg is a great field artillery center, and so we went on, instead of Fort Jackson, went on to there. Things were very different in 1943. Our country was in the depths of the greatest economic depression it had ever seen. Unemployment was incredibly high. Even owning your own home was a rarity at that time. And many people didn't have an automobile in those days, let alone two of them. Merci.
Je vous entends. Vous êtes la seule personne à qui je fais ça. D'habitude, je ne fais pas. C'est moi spécialement.
And of course, we didn't have computers in those days. Didn't have cell phones, and even electric cars weren't available back at that time. So you can see how far we've come in that time, but it also illustrates the difficulties that we had with the lack of all of this equipment back in those days. I reported for duty. Oh, I reported for duty in August, and after all this transportation, I was assigned to C Battery of the 552nd Field Artillery Battalion. Our job as members of the ground troops was to move heavy artillery wherever needed. So in many cases, we were a support for the tank corps, the infantry, and other types of units. Our unit was a 240 millimeter howitzer. That was the biggest mobile artillery that we had at the time. The shell that we fired weighed 365 pounds. So it was the biggest, and the range was 14 miles. You could fire it 14 miles away quite accurately. Things changed very quickly, and we trained on this 240 millimeter howitzer, and upon completion of our training, we departed from Fort Slocum, New York, heading to England. Now, we were heading to England, but we were going to Scotland. And the reason for that was because the eastern waters were loaded with German U-boats at that time. And so we were quite fearful of sinking ships here at that time. I was aboard the Aquitania. They used any kind of ship. Some of them were former luxury liners. I was on the Aquitania, which was a British ship. At one time it was a luxury liner, but I can assure you when I was on it, it was not a luxury liner. It was far from that. But it got us there, and when we got there, Scotland, we got there in the fog, and the next morning we noticed that we were next to the Queen Elizabeth. So even those were used for troop transport back at that time. When we left Scotland, we went to Bournemouth, England, beautiful resort community, and we trained there until we were ready to go to Normandy. On my 19th birthday, June 25th, 1944, I was in Weymouth, England, waiting for the ship to take us over to Utah Beach. And after a rough crossing, the English Channel was still choppy at that time, and it often is. And when we got to Utah Beach, the first thing we had to do was to de-waterproof our equipment and vehicles, because you're landing in water, and you had to waterproof all of this before leaving. But in 2 days, we were on duty. We had done all of this, and we were on duty, And our first stop was a friend of ours who wasn't aware that he was in a minefield. And he was a truck driver, he was a small truck. And so we no sooner arrived there that we lost him. He hit a mine, and that was the end of him. But then we went on in the Normandy campaign, and we went through the towns that you talked about. Saint-Lô was terrible. It was completely wiped out. Carentan, Donfront, Sonnos, Glagion, just to name a few. Destruction and devastation was everywhere. In November of '44, we were in a little German town called Oberforstbach. When we were struck with heavy German artillery, and the shrapnel hit three of our people, and killed the three. One of them was my best friend, Raymond Boldock, from Laconia, New Hampshire. I came from Rhode Island. He was struck with shrapnel and was killed instantly. I'm happy to tell you today that his nephew, Jeffrey, and Jeffrey's mother, Norma, are both here with us today, seated right up here. Raise your hand. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Conditions that winter were pretty harsh. Reports were that it was the coldest winter ever, according to the record. And the fighting was intense, and the cold temperatures were brutal. As a matter of fact, some of our equipment was breaking down, and that was not the best thing to happen in the Battle of the Bulge. At the end of December, we were forced to retreat to Belgium, and that's where we remained for January and February. That was the Battle of the Bulge. By March, we were back in Germany, where we remained until the war ended in May of 1945. In anticipation of the end of the war, the government had set up a system of points in order to classify the troops and the date on which they would come back home. Because obviously everybody wanted to come back home that very day, which was not possible. So they had set up a point system, very effective, based on years of service, the type of service, whether you had any medals, whether you were wounded. So it was a good system. In the meantime, they were disbanding all of these outfits, and they were disbanding ours. So they sent me to Reims. Reims is a beautiful city, and it now especially, but at that time, it was nearly annihilated. Most of the homes and businesses were destroyed, and Reims recovered very nicely. It's a beautiful city today, as many have. And of course, Reims was General Eisenhower's headquarters also. And the Little Red Schoolhouse is where the German surrender took place in Reims. We later went back to Reims after the war was over, and I'd forgotten exactly how to get to the Little Red Schoolhouse. So I went to an information bureau and asked, and young lady didn't have a clue where the Little Red Schoolhouse was. They no longer use that to describe where the surrender was signed. Finally found it and went there. By the end of the war, the 552nd Battalion had fought in 5 campaigns. The battle fired a total of 12,620 rounds of ammunition, of which 4,272 were from a captured German 105 millimeter weapon. Now, this is quite interesting because we were using their own equipment to fire against them, which happens quite often when you capture some of their equipment. So within our unit, 4 men were killed in action, and an additional 19 men were wounded in action. And as I stand before you today, I represent the sole surviving member of my battery. In December of '45, I was sent to Le Havre, France, where I boarded a victory ship to come home. Now, victory ships were hardly built. They were effective, but they were not really all that great for troop transport. So we boarded that at Le Havre and headed home. We hit a storm, and one of the wells let go, and water was coming in the ship. So they had to slow down to 3 knots an hour for a number of days while they were trying to take care of it. Well, eventually they did repair that well and could resume a little more speed. And we finally got to Newport News, Virginia, Christmas Eve at 11 o'clock. Nobody on duty to get us off the ship. So, dear old chaplain, he radioed in, and he got a crew to get us off the ship and prepare a steak dinner for us at 3 o'clock in the morning, Christmas morning. So finally, we then, the last leg of the trip, they shipped me to Fort Devens, Massachusetts. And I was discharged on New Year's Day, 1946. Today, I'm honored yet humbled to receive this award. I answered the call of duty, as did 16 million other American men and women. And I want you to all know that in my heart, I am sharing this honor with each of them, to all who serve, and especially to those who paid the ultimate sacrifice. Merci beaucoup.